Pan Am wasn't just an airline, it was the airline, the second most recognized trademark on the planet, trailing only Coca-Cola. They taught the world how to fly. They built terminals that looked like cathedrals. They carried the Beatles, James Bond, and the American century itself on their wings. Their blue globe meant safety, competence, power. Then they made a bet on a plane so massive, engineers thought it might be too heavy to fly. The 747, a flying ocean liner that burned fuel like a rocket. The executives in their tower on Park Avenue thought it was genius. The numbers said otherwise. By the time they saw the trap closing, they'd already sold the furniture to pay the rent. We tell the stories of what America built and how it came apart. The empires that seemed too big to fall. The decisions that seemed reasonable at the time. If that pulls at something in you, there's more coming. Now back to Pan Am. If you stand in the Delta parking lot at JFK Airport today, you are standing on a grave. The asphalt is cracked. The shuttle buses wheeze by. The air smells of exhaust and impatience. It is just another slab of concrete in just another airport. A place designed to be moved through, not looked at. A place where the primary emotion is the low-grade anxiety of making a connection. But close your eyes. Go back to a rainy Tuesday in June 1964. Erase the parking lot. In its place, build a cathedral of glass and steel. Raise a roof the size of a football field, suspended by cables like a bicycle wheel, hovering over the tarmac so that a passenger could walk from their limousine to the jetway without a single drop of rain ever touching their suit. Listen, the air isn't filled with the roar of buses. It's filled with the high-pitched, tearing paper whine of Pratt & Whitney engines spooling up. It's the sound of the future. Inside the glass walls, there is a specific rhythmic clatter, the click-clack-click of the Solari split-flap display board, flipping over destinations that sound less like cities and more like invitations. London, Tokyo, Rio de Janeiro, Beirut, Tehran. Smell the air inside that terminal. It doesn't smell like fast food. It smells of floor wax, expensive tobacco, and Chanel No. 5. It smells of kerosene and possibility. This was the Worldport. Terminal 3, the home of American World Airways. In 1964, this building was the center of the world. The Beatles had just walked through these doors. James Bond flew from this terminal. To walk across this blue carpet was to announce that you had made it. You weren't just a passenger. You were a citizen of the American century. And this was your embassy. Pan Am wasn't just an airline. It was the unofficial flag carrier of the United States. It was the second most recognized trademark on the planet, trailing only Coca-Cola. It was the company that taught the world how to fly. They believed, with a religious kind of certainty, that they would be flying forever, that the blue globe on the tail of their jets would eventually be seen on the moon. Standing there in the glow of the jet age, watching the first 707s lift off toward Paris, the executives in their tower on Park Avenue couldn't see the end. They couldn't see the oil crisis waiting in the desert. They couldn't see the bomb ticking inside a cassette player over Lockerbie, Scotland. And they certainly couldn't see the day, just 27 years later, when the phones would stop ringing, the pilots would be stranded on tarmacs halfway around the world, and this magnificent terminal would begin its long, slow slide into rust. They called themselves the world's most experienced airline, but experience couldn't save them from what was coming. Every empire begins with a map, and the map of the American sky was drawn by a man who didn't particularly like to fly. Juan Trippe was not your typical aviator. He wasn't a barnstormer in a leather helmet with oil under his fingernails. He was a creature of Yale and Wall Street, a man with heavy-lidded eyes and a soft, murmuring voice that forced you to lean in to hear him. He was a chess player in a world of stuntmen. In 1927, aviation was a circus. It was dangerous, unreliable, and mostly unprofitable. But while other men saw airplanes as machines for adventure, Juan Trippe saw them as machines for logistics. He saw a world where borders didn't matter. He looked at a globe and didn't see nations. He saw routes. He started with nothing but a tiny, 90-mile mail run between Key West, Florida, and Havana, Cuba. The plane was a Fokker trimotor that looked like a shed with wings. The runway in Key West was a dirt patch. The passengers sat in wicker chairs. It was humble. It was dusty. But it was the seed of a global conquest. Trippe understood something his competitors didn't. In the 1920s and 30s, the world was closing up. War was brewing. The United States government needed a way to project power into South America to counter the growing influence of German-owned airlines operating in Colombia and Brazil. They needed an airline that could act as a proxy for the State Department. Trippe volunteered. He became what Washington called the chosen instrument. He didn't just build an airline, he built a shadow navy. He would walk into the offices of Latin American dictators, unroll his maps, an offer to connect their capitals to New York City. In exchange, he demanded exclusive landing rights. He built radio stations in the jungle where no roads existed. He negotiated treaties like a head of state. By the mid-1930s, Pan Am controlled the skies over an entire continent. They were flying where the US military couldn't go. Trippe had woven a web of influence so tight that when he walked into the White House, presidents listened. He was ruthless. He was brilliant. He was terrified of competition, so he simply ensured that, by law or by leverage, he didn't have any. There's a story from the early days that tells you everything you need to know about Juan Trippe. When a competitor tried to beat him to a mail contract in the Caribbean, Trippe didn't just outbid him. He bought the only landing rights in the destination city, then he bought the radio frequencies, and finally he hired away the competitor's pilots. He didn't want to win the race. He wanted to own the track. He was building a monopoly, yes, but he was also building a philosophy. He believed that travel was the antidote to war. He believed that if people could fly to each other's countries, trade with each other, see each other's children, they wouldn't bomb each other. Mass travel, he liked to say, is the only peace. It was a beautiful, noble idea, and he pursued it with the cold-blooded efficiency of a shark. If you want to understand the romance of Pan Am, the deep, aching nostalgia that people still feel for this brand, you have to look at the water. Before there were runways that spanned the globe, there was the ocean, and to cross it, Pan Am built the Clippers. These weren't airplanes, they were flying ships, massive silver hulls that took off from the water with a roar that shook the harbors of San Francisco and New York. The China Clipper, the Dixie Clipper, the Yankee Clipper. Imagine boarding a flight in 1939. You didn't walk down a jet bridge, you walked down a dock. You boarded a boat that had wings. Inside, it was unlike anything we know today. There were no rows of cramped seats. There were dining tables covered in white linen. Stewards in white jackets served 5-course meals on real china. When it was time to sleep, the seats converted into lie-flat bunks, like a Pullman train car. It took 30 hours to get to Europe. It took 6 days to get to China, island hopping from Hawaii to Midway to Wake to Guam. It was slow, it was loud, it was terrifyingly expensive. A ticket could cost as much as a new car, but it was magic. For the first time in human history, the oceans were not barriers, they were highways. When World War II broke out, the chosen instrument was called to duty. The Clippers were painted in camouflage. The stewards traded their white jackets for military fatigues. Pan Am effectively became the air transport wing of the US military. They flew generals and supplies over the Himalayas, the hump. They ferried uranium for the Manhattan Project. Franklin D. Roosevelt became the first sitting president to fly in an airplane when he took a Pan Am Clipper to the Casablanca Conference in 1943. By the end of the war, Pan Am wasn't just a company. It was a war hero. It had blood on its hands and medals on its chest. But Juan Trippe wasn't sentimental. As the war ended, he looked at his magnificent fleet of flying boats, these romantic, luxurious ships that had conquered the world, and he decided to kill them. He saw the future coming, and the future didn't land on water. It landed on concrete. The jet age was about to begin, and the way it happened is perhaps the greatest example of corporate poker ever played. In the mid-1950s, the airline industry was comfortable. Propeller planes were reliable, profitable, and understood. Nobody wanted to change. The jet engine was new, loud, thirsty, and unproven for commercial use. Trippe didn't care. In October 1955, he did something that made the rest of the industry gasp. He placed an order for 20 Boeing 707s and 25 Douglas DC-8s. It was a staggering bet. He bought more jets in one day than existed in the entire world. With a single signature, he rendered every other airline's fleet obsolete. He forced his competitors to spend billions catching up or risk going out of business. On October 26, 1958, a Pan Am 707 took off from New York to Paris. It made the crossing in 7 hours. The world shrank by half in a single afternoon. The romance of the slow boat was gone. In its place was speed, power, dominance. Pan Am was now the master of the jet age. They had the fastest planes, the best routes, and the most political power. To support this new network, Trippe realized there were no hotels in places like Beirut or Rio that met American standards. So he founded the Intercontinental Hotel chain, just so his passengers would have a place to sleep that served a decent martini. And in the center of Manhattan, he built a monument to this dominance. The Pan Am Building, 59 stories of octagonal steel, rising directly over Grand Central Terminal. It was the largest commercial office building in the world. It was arrogant. It blocked the view down Park Avenue. It was hated by critics and loved by tenants. And at the very top, in a penthouse office in the clouds, Juan Trippe spun a massive globe, plotting the next conquest. The 1960s, the golden age. We use that phrase a lot, but for Pan Am, it wasn't a marketing slogan. It was a daily reality. To understand what was lost, you have to understand what it felt like to be a passenger in 1966. Today, air travel is an ordeal. It is a series of indignities involving shoeless lines, plastic trays, and fighting for overhead bin space. It is a bus ride at 30,000 feet, but in the golden age, stepping onto a Pan Am Clipper was an occasion. Men wore suits and ties, women wore hats and gloves. You didn't dress for comfort, you dressed for the event. The cabin of a 707 was a theater. The walls were decorated with patterns inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright. The windows seemed larger, framing the curvature of the earth. In first class, what Pan Am called President Special, the service was a choreographed ballet. The meal wasn't a foil-wrapped tray tossed on your lap. It was a banquet. Pan Am had a partnership with Maxime's of Paris, the most famous restaurant in the world. The frozen meals, a technology Pan Am pioneered, were prepared by French chefs, loaded onto the planes, and heated in convection ovens that were state-of-the-art. Imagine the smell, not the stale, recycled air of a modern cabin, but the smell of roast beef tenderloin being carved seat-side on a trolley, the aroma of wild rice and glaze, the pop of a champagne cork, Dom Perignon, naturally, even in economy, rainbow class. The experience was dignified. There was legroom, there were hot towels, there was a sense that the airline was grateful you had chosen them. And then there was the Worldport at JFK. If the plane was the theater, the Worldport was the red carpet. Completed in 1960, the terminal was an architectural marvel. The umbrella roof cantilevered out over the jets, a massive concrete saucer that seemed to defy gravity. Inside, the zodiac sculptures, massive bronze figures of the constellations, hung suspended in the glass lobby, turning slowly. The light poured in from all sides. The carpet was Pan Am blue. The ticket counters were sleek and white. It was designed to make you feel like a master of the universe. You didn't trudge through the Worldport. You glided. The flow was designed for the jet set. You could pull your Lincoln Continental up to the curb, hand your bags to a skycap, and walk fewer than 100 feet to the door of your plane. No security checkpoints, no X-ray machines, just a stroll from the sidewalk to the sky. It was an era of trust. It was an era of optimism. And Pan Am was the curator of it all. A machine is only as good as the people who operate it. And Pan Am didn't employ people, it inducted them. To work for Pan Am in the 1960s was to belong to a secret society, a knighthood. Let's start with the women, the stewardesses. In 1966, getting a job as a Pan Am stewardess was statistically harder than getting into Harvard Law School. They received thousands of applications for every open spot. The requirements were strict, specific, and by modern standards, illegal. You had to be single. You had to be under 32 years old. You had to speak 2 languages fluently. You had to be between 5 feet 3 inches and 5 feet 9 inches. And you had to weigh between 105 and 140 pounds. And yes, the girdle check was real. A supervisor could and would conduct surprise weigh-ins. If you were 2 pounds over, you were grounded, unpaid, until you lost it. It sounds oppressive today. It sounds like objectification, and it was. But talk to the women who flew then, and they will tell you a different story. They will tell you about freedom. In an era when most women were expected to be secretaries, nurses, or housewives, a Pan Am stewardess was an adventurer. She lived in London for 3 days, then Paris for 4. She knew the best tailor in Hong Kong and the best nightclub in Beirut. She had an apartment in Manhattan with 3 roommates and a passport full of stamps. She wasn't serving drinks. She was a cultural diplomat. She was trained to handle a drunken diplomat, deliver a baby at 30,000 feet, and evacuate a burning fuselage in 90 seconds, all while wearing high heels and a smile that never faltered. They called themselves the World Wings, and the bond they formed was forged in jet fuel. Then there were the pilots, the sky gods. At Pan Am, the captain was absolute authority. Many were World War II veterans who had flown bombers over Berlin or Tokyo. They had gray hair. They didn't look like tech bros or bus drivers. They looked like admirals. When a Pan Am captain walked through a terminal, people parted. With their white caps, double-breasted blazers with gold braid, and the crush-style hats, they projected a safety record that was the envy of the industry. There was a saying in the industry, Pan Am makes the rules, and they did. The culture was insular. They stayed in their own hotels, the intercontinentals. They went to their own parties. They dated each other. It was a closed loop of glamour. This workforce created a community that transcended borders. In many countries during the Cold War, the Pan Am ticket office was more powerful than the US embassy. If an American student lost their passport in Rangoon, or a businessman ran out of money in Rio, they didn't call the State Department. They went to the blue sign with the white globe. Pan Am would cut them a check, reissue the ticket, and get them home. They were the safety net. In the 1960s, Pan Am was everywhere. They flew the press corps into Vietnam. They flew the Beatles into New York. They were the backdrop of James Bond movies. When Stanley Kubrick filmed 2001: A Space Odyssey, He needed to show a shuttle flying to a space station. He didn't invent a futuristic brand. He just slapped the Pan Am logo on the side. The audience didn't laugh. They nodded. It made sense. Of course, Pan Am would fly to the moon. Who else would do it? They had carried 6.7 million passengers in 1966 alone. They were untouchable. They were inevitable. 1966. This was the moment. The absolute zenith. The profits were record-breaking. The reputation was sterling. The blue ball logo was as recognizable as the cross. And it was in this moment of supreme confidence that Juan Trippe made the decision that would seal the company's fate. He went fishing. He took a trip with Bill Allen, the head of Boeing. They were out on a boat, far away from the lawyers and the accountants, just two titans of industry, looking at the horizon. Trippe told Allen that the 707 was too small. Air travel was exploding. The airports were crowded. He needed something bigger, something massive, a ship that could carry 400 people, a flying ocean liner. He wanted the 747. At the time, the plane didn't exist. It was a sketch. Engineers thought it might be too heavy to fly. Airports said their runways would crack under the weight. Bill Allen looked at Trippe and said, "If you buy it, I'll build it." Trippe looked back and said, "If you build it, I'll buy it." Just like that. A handshake on a fishing boat. Pan Am ordered 25 Boeing 747s for $525 million. It was the largest commercial order in the history of aviation. When the news broke, the world cheered. The press called Trippe a visionary. They called the plane the Queen of the Skies. It was a magnificent machine. It had a spiral staircase. It had a piano bar in the upper deck. It was twice the size of anything else in the sky. But looking back now, with the clarity of history, we can see the trap closing. The 747 was a gamble on a specific version of the future. It was a bet that the economy would keep booming forever. It was a bet that fuel would stay cheap forever. It was a bet that mass travel would double and double again. To make a profit, a 747 needed to fly full. It needed 350, 400 people on every flight. Trippe was building a ship for an ocean of passengers. He didn't know that the ocean was about to evaporate. 1969 was the peak, the highest point before the fall, and standing at that summit, looking out at an empire that seemed invincible, nobody inside those glass walls on Park Avenue could see the cliff they were about to walk off. The decisions that would destroy everything were already being made. They just didn't know it yet. The hangover arrived in October 1973. It didn't come from a boardroom. It came from the desert. When the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries proclaimed an oil embargo, the price of aviation fuel didn't just rise, it exploded. It jumped 400% almost overnight. For an airline like Southwest or United, flying smaller planes on short hops, this was a crisis. For Pan Am, it was a catastrophe. Remember the gamble Juan Trippe had made? He had bet the entire company on the Boeing 747, the Queen of the Skies, a massive four-engine Leviathan that burned fuel like a rocket. He had bought 25 of them. Suddenly, the mathematics of the company stopped working. The 747 was designed to be profitable when fuel was 10 cents a gallon. At 40 cents a gallon, flying a 747 was like shoveling banknotes into a furnace. And then, the second blow landed, the recession. The early 70s were not the swinging 60s. The optimism was gone. The economy tightened. People stopped flying to Paris for the weekend. The result was a ghost fleet. Imagine walking onto a Pan Am 747 in 1974. This magnificent ship, designed for 400 people. You walk down the aisle and you hear nothing. The silence of empty seats. There might be 40, maybe 50 passengers on board. You could have an entire row to yourself. You could have an entire section to yourself. The flight attendants, those elite, highly trained women who had fought so hard to wear the uniform, were now stewards of emptiness. They served Maxim's frozen dinners to rows of blue upholstery, and as the losses mounted, millions of dollars a month, a fatal structural flaw in the company began to reveal itself. A flaw that had been there since the beginning, hidden by the success of the golden age. Pan Am had no home. It seems impossible, doesn't it? The American flag carrier didn't actually fly in America because of regulations dating back to the 1930s. Regulations Juan Trippe himself had once supported to keep competitors off his international turf. Pan Am was forbidden from flying domestic routes. You could fly Pan Am from New York to London, but you couldn't fly Pan Am from Chicago to New York. This meant Pan Am had no feeder network. United Airlines could fly a passenger from Des Moines to Chicago to New York, and then put them on a United flight to London. They kept the customer the whole way. Pan Am had to wait at JFK like a beggar, hoping passengers would arrive on other airlines and switch to them. But why would they? Why switch terminals, recheck bags, and deal with the hassle when TWA or United could take you all the way? So Pan Am's massive 747s took off from JFK half empty, while their competitors' planes were full of passengers fed from their domestic networks. The chosen instrument was now trapped in a cage of its own making. Juan Trippe, the visionary, the chess player, retired in 1968. He walked away just before the storm hit. He left his successors with a fleet of expensive planes, no domestic routes, and a world that was rapidly turning against them. The 1970s became a decade of slow bleeding. The glamour was still there, the uniforms were still sharp, the service was still impeccable. But behind the scenes, the panic was setting in. By 1980, the leadership knew they were dying. They had to do something. They had to break out of the cage. They needed domestic routes. If the government wouldn't give them new routes, they would have to buy them. This brings us to the tragedy of National Airlines. It seemed like a lifeline. National was a domestic carrier based in Miami. They flew up and down the East Coast. They flew to California. They had the routes Pan Am desperately needed to feed its international network. So Pan Am bought them, but they didn't just buy them. They got into a bidding war and paid $400 million. They overpaid massively for a company that was, in almost every way, the opposite of Pan Am. This is where the story shifts from economics to culture, because companies aren't just balance sheets, they are tribes. Pan Am was the tribe of the sky gods. White gloves, Paris, protocol, military precision, arrogance perhaps, but an arrogance earned by being the best. National Airlines, their marketing slogan was "Fly Me." Their commercials featured stewardesses looking into the camera and saying, "I'm Cheryl, fly me." It was sexualized, it was casual, it was scrappy. When you tried to merge these two tribes, it was a disaster. The Pan Am pilots looked down on the national pilots as bus drivers. The national employees looked at Pan Am as snobs. The seniority lists, the holy grail of airline employment, became a battleground. Instead of creating a seamless network, the merger created a civil war. The costs didn't go down, they went up. The synergies never happened. Pan Am was now bleeding money from two wounds instead of one. To stay alive, to pay the debt on the 747s and the debt from the merger, management began to do the unthinkable. They began to sell the furniture to pay the rent. First, the building. The Pan Am building on Park Avenue, the symbol of their dominance. The tower that blocked the sky. In 1980, they sold it to MetLife for $400 million. It was a shock. The headquarters was gone. The executives moved out, but the sign remained for a while, a ghostly reminder of who used to own the skyline. But selling the building wasn't enough. The bleeding continued. So in 1985, they made the decision that broke the company's heart. They sold the Pacific. Remember the Clippers? Remember the 1930s? The island hopping, the romance of the Orient? The Pacific Division was Pan Am's heritage. It was their birthright. It was also their only profitable division, the gateway to the booming Asian markets of the future. And they sold it. They sold the entire Pacific Division, routes, planes, gates, staff, to United Airlines for $750 million. It was an act of cannibalism. They sold their future to pay for their past. When the news broke, employees wept. Old pilots who had flown the China Clipper routes couldn't believe it. It was like the British Empire selling the Royal Navy. Without the Pacific, Pan Am was no longer a global airline. It was an Atlantic airline, a shadow of itself. But management said it was necessary. They said it bought them time. They said it cleared the debt. They said they could rebuild around the Atlantic and South America. Perhaps they believed it. Perhaps they couldn't see that they had just eaten the seed corn. They survived, but they were fragile. They were a porcelain vase standing on a trembling table. One shove, one unexpected blow would shatter them. The blow came on December 21st, 1988. It didn't happen in a boardroom. It happened at 31,000 feet over the Scottish town of Lockerbie. Pan Am Flight 103, the Clipper made of the seas. It was a 747, flying from London to New York. It was packed with people going home for Christmas. Students from Syracuse University, families, soldiers. At 7:02 p.m., a Semtex bomb hidden inside a Toshiba cassette player in the forward cargo hold detonated. The explosion severed the nose of the aircraft. The plane disintegrated. 243 passengers, 16 crew, 11 people on the ground in Lockerbie, 270 souls. It was, at the time, the deadliest terror attack against the United States in history. We have to pause here. We have to let the weight of this land. Because this wasn't just a tragedy. It was the moment the brand changed forever. For 60 years, the blue globe on the tail of a Pan Am jet had meant safety. It meant American competence. It meant you were in good hands. After Lockerbie, that same blue globe meant something else. It meant target. The terrorists hadn't just bombed a plane. They had bombed the symbol of America. And because Pan Am was the chosen instrument, because it was the most recognizable American icon abroad, it was the target. The psychological impact was devastating. Corporate travel departments issued memos. Do not fly Pan Am. Families canceled vacations. Empty seats became empty rows. Empty rows became empty planes. The airline was already weak. It was already carrying too much debt, already stripped of its Pacific routes. It couldn't withstand this. Pan Am was prosecuted in the court of public opinion. Questions were asked about security in Frankfurt, about baggage matching. The airline was sued for hundreds of millions of dollars. But the real cost was silence. The silence of the phones not ringing. The final years years, 1989 and 1990, were a death march. They sold the shuttle service to Delta. They sold the London Heathrow routes, the crown jewels of the Atlantic, to United. They were stripping the carcass while it was still moving. And then, the final stroke of bad luck. History, which had lifted Pan Am up, finally crushed it. August 1990, Iraq invades Kuwait. The Gulf War begins. Oil prices spiked again. And the fear of terrorism, the fear that had started with Lockerbie, reached a fever pitch. International travel simply stopped. Pan Am was losing $3 million a day. They filed for bankruptcy protection in January 1991, but they kept flying. There was a plan, a hope. Delta Airlines had agreed to invest, to keep Pan Am alive as a smaller partner, focusing on Latin America. The employees held their breath. They took pay cuts. They worked harder. They believed that Pan Am was too big to die. You don't let the flag carrier disappear. It's like closing the Statue of Liberty. But in the world of business, there are no monuments, only mathematics. December 4th, 1991. It was a Wednesday. In the headquarters in New York, Pan Am CEO Russell Ray was in a meeting. He was working on the details of the restructuring with Delta. He thought they had a deal. He thought they had a lifeline. Then came the call. Delta was pulling the plug. The losses were too deep. The risk was too high. They were cutting off the funding. Today, now, it wasn't a wind down. It was an execution. The order went out at 9 a.m. Cease operations. Think about those two words. Cease operations. For 64 years, Pan Am had never stopped. Through the Great Depression, through World War II, through the Korean War, the Cold War, the oil crises, the propellers and the jets had never stopped turning. And then, in 1 minute, they did. The teletype machines in airports around the world began to chatter. American World Airways has ceased operations. All flights cancelled. At JFK inside the Worldport, the staff stared at the screens. Some thought it was a joke. Some thought it was a drill. Then the phones went dead. At the ticket counters, agents had to look up at lines of passengers, people going to weddings, funerals, business meetings, and tell them, "I'm sorry, we don't exist anymore." But the most haunting scenes were on the tarmac. Pan Am planes were in the air all over the world. As they landed, they were seized. In Barbados, a Pan Am 727 had just pushed back from the gate. The engines were running. The passengers were buckled in. The tower radioed the pilot. "Pan Am, return to the gate. Shut down engines. You do not have clearance to depart." The pilot asked why. "Your company has liquidated," the controller said. The pilot had to shut down the engines. The silence that rushed into the cabin was the sound of an empire dying. He had to get on the PA system and tell 150 people that they weren't going to Miami. They were going nowhere. And then, the pilot and the crew had to get off the plane. They were stranded. Their credit cards didn't work. Their hotel vouchers were worthless. They were thousands of miles from home, wearing the uniforms of a ghost army. 7,500 employees lost their jobs that morning. There was no severance, no golden parachute. The pension fund was pennies on the dollar. People who had given 40 years to the company, who had started as mechanics on the Clippers and were now senior engineers, walked out into the parking lot with cardboard boxes. It was over. What happens to a tribe when the village burns down? They wander. In the weeks and months after the closure, the employees of Pan Am found themselves in a world that didn't understand them. They had skills that were specific to a culture that no longer existed. A Pan Am stewardess knew how to serve caviar properly. She knew how to navigate the customs hall in Tehran, but she didn't know how to work in a cubicle in New Jersey. Other airlines hired some of them. United and Delta took the pilots and some flight attendants. But it wasn't the same. Former Pan Am employees talk about the culture shock. At Delta, they were told to smile more. At United, they were told they were too formal. They were treated like refugees from a fallen aristocracy. They formed alumni groups, World Wings International, Clipper Pioneers. They met in hotel ballrooms once a year. They wore their pins. They told the old stories. Remember the party in Rio? Remember the time we flew the Beatles? Remember when we were the best? It was a way of keeping the fire lit, even if the hearth was cold. But the brand became a zombie. Because Pan Am was such a powerful icon, the trademark was valuable. It was sold off in bankruptcy. It was bought by a railway company. Then it was sold to a holding company. Suddenly, you could buy a blue Pan Am tote bag at a fast fashion store. You could watch a TV show called Pan Am that turned their lives into a soap opera. For the people who had lived it, this was the final indignity. Their life's work, their heritage, reduced to a retro fashion accessory for hipsters who had never set foot on a 707. The logo is everywhere today, on t-shirts, on laptop stickers. It represents cool vintage travel, but the soul evaporated on December 4th, 1991. If you go to New York City today, you can still see the body. Walk down Park Avenue, look north. The building is still there, 200 Park Avenue. It's called the MetLife building now, the bold, brutalist octagon that Juan Trippe built built to block the sun. It's still hated by architecture critics. It's still massive, but look at the top. Where the giant 15-foot-tall letters PANAM once glowed, there is now the polite corporate beige of an insurance company. But go higher. Look at the roof. The helipad is still there. In the 1960s, you could take a helicopter from JFK and land right on top of that building. You could check in for your flight in the lobby, take an elevator to the roof, fly to the airport, and board a jet to Paris. It was the ultimate expression of speed and power. Now, the helipad is empty. It's covered in pigeon spikes and soot. It's a platform waiting for a helicopter that will never arrive. And what about the Worldport? It held on for a long time. Delta used it for a while, but it was crumbling. The roof leaked. The glass was drafty. It was a building designed for 707s trying to handle modern jets. It was a relic. Preservationists tried to save it. They argued it was a historic landmark, a temple of the jet age. They said tearing it down was like tearing down Penn Station. But in America, we don't worship failure, and we don't save airports. In 2013, the bulldozers came. The umbrella roof, that magnificent saucer that had sheltered the Beatles and Bond, was crushed into gravel. Today, it is a parking lot for Delta airplanes. If you go there, there is no plaque, there is no marker, just the smell of kerosene and the sound of engines. So what remains? When an empire falls, it leaves dust, it leaves lawsuits, it leaves memories. But Pan Am left something else, an absence. We didn't just lose a corporation in 1991, we lost a specific version of the American dream. Pan Am represented the moment when we believed that technology was benevolent, that American commerce would unite the world, that if we just built faster planes and bigger terminals, we could outrun war, we could outrun prejudice, we could outrun time itself. It was arrogant, yes. It was imperial, but it was also hopeful. Today we fly because we have to. We cram into seats that are too small. We eat peanuts. We worry about Wi-Fi. We endure. But if you talk to the people who worked for Pan Am, the ones with the gray hair and the pins on their lapels, they will tell you it wasn't always like this. They will tell you about a time when the sky wasn't a commodity. It was a calling. They will tell you about the silence of a 747 over the Atlantic at night, the stars hanging above the cockpit, the passengers sleeping below, wrapped in blankets that smelled of laundry starch. They will tell you that for a brief shining moment, they didn't just fly passengers, they flew the flag. The building on Park Avenue is silent now. The Worldport is dust. But look up. Every time you see a contrail cutting across the high blue, heading for a destination you've never seen, that is the ghost of the Clipper. They shrank the world. They connected the continents. They taught us that the ocean was just a highway. But in the end, the world became too small for them.